Welcome to a new series of video tutorials regarding Xcode programming. In this particular tutorial, we are going to be looking at creating the Hello World app using Swift version 2. Now, in the past 6 months, Swift has been upgraded from version 1.2 to version 2 plus, and Xcode has also been upgraded to include the new Apple items such as the iWatch. So very interesting times with the release of the new Xcode and of course Swift version 2, which is different in a number of respects from Swift version 1.2, which is the reason why we need to redo these tutorials. Okay, now for some of you, the Hello World app may be something completely new for you. For some of you, you may have had a bit of a dabble with creating the Hello World app before. I think most of you would probably be new to this. So all you need to do is to watch the video, follow the steps, and pause the video if you need to, replay it again if you need to go over parts that you didn't quite understand or weren't able to keep up with. So yeah, what we'll do is we'll make a start, and to begin with, what we need to do is to open up the Xcode application. Now you can find the Xcode application. It may be in the bottom menu bar. If not, what you need to do is you need to go to the Finder window, and in the Applications directory you need to, at the bottom, you'll find Xcode. And I'll just zoom in so you can see it. There it is. Just double click Xcode to get it up and running. And you'll see Xcode up the top, so you just need to close the Finder window or minimize it, and you've got Xcode ready to go. Alright, the next step is to go to the File menu, and what we need to do is to open up a new project. Now you can see here we have File, Playground, Project, Workspace. You'll be introduced to these different features of Xcode later on, but for now what we'll do is we want to open up a new Xcode project so we can create our Hello World app. So we'll click on Project. And you're provided with a number of different templates to choose from. As you can see here, we've got the iOS application, framework and library. We've got the Watch OS application, framework and library. We've got the TV OS, which is a new one for Xcode, as is the Watch OS. And we've got OS X, which is the OS X operating system for desktops and laptops. Okay, so what we want to do is to create an app for the iOS operating system, which covers, of course, mobile devices such as the iPhone and the iPad. The Watch operating system is different again at TV, and of course the OS X for desktops and laptops. So let's focus on iOS for now. And you've got a number of different types of applications to choose from. The one that we're interested in at the moment is simply the single view application, because we're just making an app that has a single page view. Okay, so single view application, what we do is we highlight that. Should already be highlighted by default. but what we'll do is we'll simply click on that if it isn't highlighted. Okay, and then what you do is tap on Next. All right, now this next window is simply asking for a product name. So we'll just type in Hello World Swift version 2. Okay. I'll just zoom in a bit so you can see it in case you can't see it clearly. Organisation name can be whatever you want it to be. The language, now if you click on the drop down tab, you have the choice of Swift or Objective-C. We're actually learning Swift, so just make sure Swift is selected as the language that you're using to create the app. And for the purposes of this exercise and the follow-up exercises, we want to make sure we have the iPhone selected. Okay. Universal means that basically your app will be applied to the iPad and the iPhone. But in the next tutorial, I'll be showing you how to lay out your screen. And I just want to focus on the iPhone for now, and then you can apply your knowledge of screen layouts to the iPad as well later on. Okay, so let's just focus on the iPhone for now. Keep it simple. The checkboxes underneath, by default, just leave them as they are. Okay, and you should have the use core data not selected. Okay, the include unit tests checked, and include user interface tests included as well, as checked as well. Okay, so just make sure that's all done. And when you've done that, simply tap on Next. Okay, now this next part will be asking you where do you want to save your Xcode project. All right, so what you want to do is you want to save it to more than likely the desktop. Okay, so I'll leave it as desktop. If yours is not desktop, if it's documents, you can simply click on the drop down list here and change it to desktop so that it's saved to your desktop. The source control, make sure the create git repository on my Mac is checked. When that's done, all you need to do next is click on the create button down the bottom here. And what you'll find is that you've opened up, or you've created the Hello World Swift 2 folder, and Xcode opens up to its interface. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail with the different menus and windows in Xcode. As you can see, there's a lot to learn about. There's lots of features here, so it'll take you a bit of time to get used to it. Okay, if you're not particularly experienced with using Xcode. All right, now the next part of our tutorial is the setting up of our user interface for the app. Now you should always design the app user interface on paper. If not on paper, then there are specific apps that you can obtain that help you to design the user interface on a mobile device, even on a laptop or a desktop. You should ideally be looking at doing that first before actually creating the user interface on the main storyboard, which is this part here. So I'll just zoom into this part here on the screen. This is called the Project Navigator. Okay, and you can see there are a number of other icons here that you will use eventually, but we'll just focus on the Project Navigator for now, which contains the parts, the different parts of Xcode that are needed to run an application. Okay. Now the main ones that we'll be concerned with is the viewcontroller.swift file and the main.storyboard file. Okay, so they're the two that we'll be working on mostly to then get our app up and running. Alright, now if you have this view control scene window open, what we're going to do is we're going to close it, and you can close it by, you can see down the bottom here, there's this hide document outline symbol here, icon. We'll just tap on it and that closes it for us. And we can open it again if we want to have a look at it, but don't worry about it for now. What we want to do is we want to be able to see our main storyboard, which is our design space. Now, over here on the right hand side of the screen, you have here the object library. Now, it should be selected by default. If not, if the template library is selected, and sometimes it is, just tap on the object library once, okay, to open up our object library. Also at the top here we have the attributes inspector, okay, which we'll be using when we are creating our app. We've got the connections inspector, which we'll worry about a bit later on, and the size inspector, which we'll worry about later on as well. But just make sure that the attributes inspector and the object library are selected. Okay, now once you've got that out of the way, to make our Hello World app, we're going to design it so that we have three objects, on the screen. We'll have a label and two buttons. And the two buttons, one button will show the greeting, Hello World, and the second button will hide the greeting. And that's all that the app will do. So fairly straightforward, just something to get us into how to make an app, your first app. So let's scroll down the object library here and let's find our label and two buttons. And you can see here, and I'll just zoom in so you can see it clearly. We have here a label that we can choose from and a button. Okay, and if we zoom out, it actually tells you when you move your mouse pointer over the object, what it is. Gives you a bit of a description there. And that applies to all of the objects in the object library. So if you don't know what something is, you can simply tap on it and it will provide you with a detailed description of how to use it, which is very handy. Okay, so as I said, we want to drag a label onto the screen. So all you need to do is simply tap on the object, hold the mouse button down. So hold the mouse button down and then drag, while you're holding the mouse button down, drag the label onto the main storyboard. Let go of the mouse and the label will be placed wherever you've put it on the main storyboard. You can move it around. You can see the hand symbol. I'll just zoom in so you can see it. You can see the hand symbol, so it changes from a mouse pointer to a hand symbol, so you can move it around. And you can also, by grabbing the handles on the edge of the label, click on it, hold the mouse button down and drag it to make it bigger. There we go. Okay. Now, we also said that we wanted 2 buttons. So what we'll do is we'll click on the button icon and drag across 2 buttons onto our main storyboard. There we go. Once again, I can make them larger. That's what I'll do. Now I can do this manually as I'm doing using the mouse pointer, or alternatively I can actually use the settings over here in the attributes inspector to change the sizes of my objects. Okay. Now, once you've done that, what we need to do is we want to fix up the font sizes and the font types for our label and buttons. So we don't want to leave these objects with label and just button in each of them. We actually want to change them so they actually have some meaning for the user. Okay, so what we'll do is first of all we'll tap on the label object. Okay, and you can see here on the right hand side we have the label here, the text displayed as label here. Now we can change that. Okay, we can change that to label display if we want to. And that will automatically change it here on the screen. Okay. Now we can also change the font type of our label. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll change that to something else. Now if we want to make the size bigger, we can do that. We can go custom for our font types, and let's say we want to select Helvetica as our font type. Let's say we want to make it bold. and we can also change the size of our text. We'll change it to 36 font size, and then we can go done. And you can see here that it's obviously a bit bigger than the actual label size, so what we'll do is we'll extend the size of our object so that it can actually fit the text within the object container. Now you can see the alignment at the moment is to the left, so we'll center that so that our display is in the middle. And then what we'll do is we'll likewise change the font sizes and types for our buttons. Okay, and we'll do the same thing that we did for the label, and we'll change it to exactly the same text, font, and size. So let's go to here where it says title and button, and we'll change that to show greeting. Change the font system to custom, Helvetica. We'll leave it as regular for now, and we'll change that to 36 size as well. Move that across to here. Likewise, change the second button to hide greeting. We'll just make the handles on this a little bit bigger as well, so that it's equal with the accompanying button. Okay, now you can rearrange these any way you like, of course. I'm just simply giving you an intro to how to set up the objects, the font types and sizes on the main storyboard. Okay, now once you've done that, you can change the color of the buttons. So for show greeting you might have it blue, for hide greeting you might change that to another color. Might want to change that to something purpley. Okay, just so it looks a little bit different. And you could also provide a different color background to the screen. I won't go into that for now because we simply want to concentrate on getting our first app up and running. Okay, now once you have your objects set up on the screen, the next part of the tutorial focuses on linking the code that you need to write with the objects here on the main storyboard. Now remember, of course, that an app involves a user pressing objects on the screen to then make things happen in the app. And of course, the only way things can happen is if you've programmed the app, in other words, given the objects instructions to do things. Okay, so you've got the user side of the app. Okay, you've then got the internal, what goes on behind the screen, programming for the app, and then you have the output of that app on the screen. All right, so it's basically a case of input, processing, and output. All right, so in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to go to our View Swift controller file here in the project navigator. Okay, so I'll just zoom in so you can see it. So we were in the main storyboard. We need to now move to the View controller.swift file. Now I'll zoom in a little bit because the code can be a little bit hard to see on the screen. So I'll just zoom in a bit more because I know sometimes with the videos the code is quite small on the screen and can be very hard to read. Okay, now you're probably looking at this going, wow, you know, looks very confusing. Now this is the sort of thing that you know, with practice you get used to. Initially it can be very confusing and bamboozling as to what's going on, but the benefit of learning from a simple app and then progressing through to more complicated apps is that you know, you learn the basics and you work your way up from there. Okay, so you can see here we have green text on the screen. Now just to let you know what this is, anything that has a double / in code is designated as comments. So you can make as many comments as you like, and the comments are not included as part of the processing of code. Alright, so it's basically, these are just comments. You can write comments about the code you've written. As you can see here, there's a double / here to say do any additional setup after loading the view, typically from an IB file. So that's just a comment. It is not included in the processing of code. All right, just so you know. And these squiggly brackets here, they're very important because they usually signify the opening of functions, which is what this is here. Okay. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to link our objects to the code. All right. Now, one of the advantages of Swift over Objective-C is that you can actually do a lot of drag and dropping. So you can drag a lot of the objects into the code, and then from the code, okay, you can actually type in your code, link it up, and then run it. Very straightforward. So what we need to do in order to get that set up on our screen is we need to have the viewcontroller.swift window open as well as our main storyboard. Now you're probably wondering, well, how do we do that? Well, It's not too hard. What we need to do is click on the main.storyboard. Now, you might remember the Show Document Online tab here. We'll click on that. Okay, and what we can do is we can actually change it to View Swift Controller. Let's bring that up again. Just bear with me for a minute. So, okay. And we'll close that there for now. So we've got a bit of room. Okay, so you can follow that, you're doing really well. So what we've got is the main storyboard, okay, which is this part here. That view control scene, just close that for now. And what you need to do is go to the view menu, go to Assistant Editor, and select the Show Assistant Editor. And that should bring up our View Controller Swift, View Controller.swift file up here on the right hand side, while maintaining our main.storyboard window here. Okay, so hopefully you are up to that point as well. Okay, now as I was just saying to you before, we need to link the objects to the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on the right hand side here for a moment. Now you can see here the class view controller, and we've got that first squiggly bracket. Now I'm going to click on and put my mouse cursor next to the first braces. Then I'm going to press the return or enter key on the keyboard just a couple of times to give me a bit of room here to be able to work with. Alright, now once I've done that, I'll just zoom out again for a minute. And like I was saying to you before, the advantage of Swift is that you can click on the object, okay, and what you can do is you can actually drag the object into the code. Now how do you do that? Well, what you need to do is click on the object so it's selected, and then hold the control key on the keyboard down, and then click the mouse button and hold the mouse button down. Now while you've got the control key and the mouse button selected or clicked and you're holding it down, then drag the mouse across to the code. Now you can see a line going across the screen to the View Controller.swift window, and it says Insert Outlet Action or Outlet Collection. Now once you've done that, let go of the mouse button, and then you can let go of the control key on the keyboard as well. And you can see here basically we've opened a window which allows us to select different settings for our object. Now, the connection we need to make here, we've got a selection of 3 to choose from. We've got outlet, action, outlet, collection. We want to select the action connection. The object is a view controller, so that's fine. We don't need to change that. The name of the object is, of course, show greeting. Now you'll notice that the show has a lowercase s and a capital G. Okay. In programming, if you have 2 words concatenated or joined together, what you need to do is make sure that the first letter of the first word is lowercase, and usually, by convention, the second word is usually uppercase. Okay. Then what we need to do is to select the type of object that we've created, which is a user interface button. Okay, so user interface button. The user will press the button, and then the computer will process the code and then provide output on the screen. This touch up inside part here means that the user presses the button, and if that button is selected by touching up on the inside of the border of the button, then the action will then take place. Okay, so don't get confused by that. We leave that as it is, and you should have these settings on your screen. Once you've got those settings included, we can then click on the connect or tap connect. And you can see now that what's happened is, over here on the right hand side, we've actually created a function which is show greeting. Okay, and it's the same properties that we selected in the window, and they've simply been placed in code, okay, on the screen. I won't go into too much detail about what it all means at the moment. We will examine in more detail what all these symbols mean and what they do later on. Okay, now the next part involves giving our button a task to perform, something to do. You can't just create a button and not tell it what it needs to do. Okay, it's like me creating an object called a car, but not giving it any wheels or a steering wheel or doors or windows. It's not a particularly well-functioning car if it doesn't have attributes, if it doesn't have properties and attributes and things to do with those attributes and properties. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to give this button some attributes and things to do. And how do we do that? Well, we need to type in some code. Okay, it's not particularly difficult code, so we'll just type in some of the code that we need to put in. So if you just follow what I'm doing here on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that for now, and I'm going to go back to my second button, which is the hide greeting. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the show greeting with the hide greeting. So I'm going to hold the control key on the keyboard down, click on the mouse and hold the mouse button down, and then drag across to the view controller .swift window. Then I'm going to let go of the mouse, and again I'll go through here and change some of the settings. I'll change that name to hide greeting, change that to user interface button, leave the rest of the settings as they are, and then connect. And you can see now I have a second object connected. Okay, and again I'm just going to type in some code, so if you could do the same, that would be really good. Okay. Okay. Alright, so hopefully you've been able to keep up with that so far. Alright, now there's one more object. We've placed two objects in our view controller.swift file. However, we also need to place our label display object in the view controller.swift file as well. Remember that any object on the screen, okay, needs to be connected to the computer. And the only way we can do that is by connecting it to the view controller.swift file and giving it something to do, or giving it programming instructions for that object to perform a task when the user presses that particular button. So once again, we'll hold the control key on the keyboard down, click on the mouse button and hold it down, and then drag across to the view controller.swift window. Let go of the mouse button. Okay, and what you have here, and I'll just zoom in so you can see it, is an outlet connection, which is what our display, our label display object is. It's an outlet where it will display text or a message. All right, so what we're going to call this outlet is display. It's a label, as we know, and the storage doesn't matter whether it's weak or strong. We'll call it strong for now. I'll explain it to you later on. And then we simply tap on the connect button. Okay, and I'll just zoom in to the view controller.swift file so you can see what's going on here. Okay. Now there we have it. You might have noticed there's a few red dots here. Now I'm intentionally going to leave these red dots in for the moment. All right, so that we can do what's called a bit of debugging. Now, you know, whether you're making your first app or your 10th app or your 1000th app, you'll always find there will be a need to debug your code. In other words, you'll need to go through and check and see for any errors or mistakes that might come up. And there's a number of different types of errors that can occur. They can be runtime errors, they can be excuse me, syntax errors. These errors can appear and you're going to need to do something about them. So now's a good time to learn how to fix your errors up. Now, what I've got here, and we'll just go over here for a moment, is I have an object called LBL display. Okay, so what we've done here is we're saying to the computer, well, I want you to display hello world into our label display. Okay, I've called it LBL display.text. Down here, I've said to the computer, well, when the user taps on the hide greeting button, I want the label display to go blank. Okay, and down here, I've actually called my display here just display. Now, computers are very particular about labels and names, and you have to be exact. You have to be spot on. You cannot assume that the computer will know differences between words that you've used to describe a particular object. So if you call an object LBL display, you've got to continue to call it LBL display. And as you can see here, we haven't done that. We've simply called it display. So what we need to do is put in LBL display, okay, to keep it consistent. And as you can see, one of our red dots has disappeared, and the label display has actually changed to a bluish colour, which means that it's recognised the actual name that we've given it. So it understands the link now between the two objects. And many of you, and I've noticed this over the years, make these kinds of errors, not because you're not any good, but because you're still learning. And of course, what you need to learn is that a computer can only understand instructions that you give it, and the spelling, the labeling needs to be spot on. There's no room for differences. Okay, so just make sure you keep that in mind. Now, this other red dot up here, there's a problem. There's still a problem. So if I tap on the red button, it will actually give me a bit of a clue as to what's wrong. And what it's telling me here is you can fix it by inserting the quotation marks, because I've actually missed a quotation mark. I've got one quotation here, but I haven't opened one up here. So if I tap on Fix It, Insert, okay, it should do it. Sometimes it doesn't, so just be aware of that. So sometimes you actually have to go in and manually do it. Okay, and as you can see here, once I've included my quotation marks, the red dot has now disappeared. Okay, so sometimes the fix it message works, sometimes it doesn't. Just be aware of that. It's not perfect, but it's just something you'll need to get used to with practice. Okay. Now, one other problem I've noticed here is that now that we've changed the name of our object, okay, you remember when we dragged our label display across to here, we didn't actually call it LBL display, we called it just display. And you can see here this dot here is now an empty dot. What it means is that this object that we've described is not actually linked to the object here on our screen. Okay, and many of you will make this sort of mistake when you're creating your first apps. Now, you'll have objects that are not linked to code in the view controller file, and then you'll try and run the app and it won't work, or particular objects on the screen won't work. So what you need to make sure that you do is that your objects, if you change the names or even when you create the objects, making sure that these objects are linked together. Now, you can do this by simply clicking on the button, dragging the line across to the object, okay, and letting go of the mouse button, and now you'll find that the object is now linked. And I can check that by simply moving my mouse pointer across each of the dots, and you can see the first object is linked to show greeting, the second object is linked to hide greeting, and the third object is linked to label display. We also need to make sure that in the connections inspector, which is, and I'll just zoom in, which is this item here, you'll notice that we have two referencing outlets now. We have display and LBL display, or label display. Now remember, we changed, or initially we had display as our referencing outlet, and then we changed it to label display. And you can see they're both here at the moment. Now that'll cause some problems when we run the app. So what we need to do is we need to actually delete the first one, which is just title display. And we just, over here you can see the cross here, we just click on that and it deletes it, and we're left with the label display referencing outlet only. Okay, now that's important to do, otherwise if we run our app we will run into trouble. Okay, so now that that's done, we can go to the next step. Okay, now once that's all done, you're ready to run your app. So what you need to do to get your app up and running, you'll see over here we've got this right pointing arrow, which is our run button. This will compile your code, process it, and then output your app onto an iOS simulator, which will appear on the screen. So what we'll do is we'll click on that now to see what happens. Okay, so once I've run my app, that's come up on the screen, if I click on Show Greeting, it will have Hello World with the semicolon at the end. If I click on Hide Greeting, it disappears. So whenever you come up with these types of errors, you need to go back to your code, and we'll just quit the simulator for now. You need to go back to your code and check and see what you've done. Now, as you can see here, our quotation marks start here, but they end after the semicolon. So if we placed our quotation marks here, you can see what's in red will appear on the screen. not what is after the quotation marks or before it. So let's save our changes. Let's run the app again. Don't worry about the fact that the hide greeting is off the screen. That's something that we'll deal with in the next tutorial. Click on Show Greeting, and as you can see, we have the Hello World app appearing. Hello World, greeting appearing on our app. And if we click on Hide Greeting, it disappears. And there we go. So next tutorial, we will look at fixing up the layout of the Hello World app to make sure that it actually fits into our simulator. Okay, so hopefully you've had some success with getting your Hello World app up and running, and we look forward to seeing it progress through these tutorials and creating more apps.